This is Metabolic Radio, the podcast dedicated to keeping you informed when it comes to everything fitness. My name is Taylor Empey, and with the help of my co-host Shane Pace, we aim to expose the truths about the health and fitness industry. The information and suggestions given in this podcast should not be considered as clinical or medical advice. Consult with a physician before implementing any information provided on this podcast. Welcome to Metabolic Radio.
I was really wondering where you were going to go this time.
Yeah. I'm just going to have to come up with like a second intro after the intro to bridge the gap so it's not awkward.
Well, the funniest part is the warm-ups, and then we don't even know where this is going to go. I kind of dig.
So, for this episode, what are we talking about? You know. Come on, we just talked about this.
8-ball.
Muscle fibers.
That's very doubtful, though, sir.
We have this magic 8-ball. If you guys remember these, I haven't seen them in a while. It's the little 8 balls that you shake them and it like tells you your fortune or it just answers your questions. And apparently, it is unclear what we're going to talk about today.
It's very doubtful. It does not accept.
Mine said yes, though. Actually, so we are going to talk about muscle fibers.
Well, it seems that you will.
You might want to help me out on that because I always get them mixed up.
All right. But it did say very doubtful on my side. I'm just pointing out the details to this.
Okay. So, we're going to pull up our notes here just to... Hey, what are you doing?
Oh, there you go.
There we go. Okay. Anyway.
Stretching.
So, we wanted to talk about this because different types of training will elicit a different response in the body depending on what you're doing, and thus it will recruit different muscle fibers, right?
Yes, which we talked about.
We did
in my brain failure.
Mm-hmm.
And
in the brain failure episode?
Yes.
The one.
We should rechange that. We're going to change. No, we're not going to change the title. We should change the title, though, to the brain. Shane fails. Well, I didn't fail. All right, let's get into this.
Let's not get into another spelling bee.
No, because that's the scariest thing is, like you said, I thought I could write them. Let's write them. I don't know how that's going to help them, but...
So do you want to start on the endurance side or on the strength side?
Let's roll the dice and go with whatever you think.
I would say endurance because it's simpler and it gets more complex as we get down to the other fibers, right?
See, I almost think of the opposite because I think
you think so?
I think 2Bs are less because there's a lot less.
Okay,
really have to define. But
we'll go left to right,
left to right
like
from
American
this chart
people.
that we are actually looking at.
So,
not that we necessarily need it.
Categorically speaking, if that's a word,
if not, it is now.
The types of muscle fibers that you're going to recruit are there's type 1 fibers. These are exclusively endurance muscle fibers. So endurance activity is what's going to recruit them. Type 2A muscle fibers are a type of strength fiber. Mm-hmm. So are type 2X and so are type 2B. So those are your general categorizations.
And I think that we need to break it and start talking about certain details of this right here. On the type 2s, because of, you're right on this, there's a little more detail because of the 3 different aspects of it. But when most people, if you go online and you're reading about type 2X fibers, you'll actually be talking about type 2B fibers instead, because those are used most of the time interchangeably instead of, good idea.
Yeah.
Instead of being, one or the other, they combine those because the type X is semi.
Well, they're just so very similar that it's easy to mix them up.
They are, but they're. It's not that they haven't been shown, but they're semi theory at this point. Type X, and there's people out there that talk about type 3, which I have not seen enough actual belief that's out there yet, but they're theorized to an extent. So type X, type 2X is even though it's kind of more scientifically proven, is a little bit more theoretic, if that makes sense. So
yeah.
Type 2Bs, usually if somebody's talking type 2X and they don't differentiate between an X and a B fiber,
They're probably referring to
probably
B.
speaking about B fibers, if that makes sense. That's why I thought we probably should talk about that really quick.
So to get into like kind of the greater details about these, type 1s or endurance muscle fiber is also referred to as slow twitch.
Yes.
Type 2, because they fatigue slowly.
Correct.
Because they have, as we just were talking about, they have higher levels of mitochondria,
yes,
which are the energy producers in your cells. So because they have higher energy production
capacity
systems, they don't fatigue as much and they produce a lot more energy. And as you get further into the strength fibers, there's less presence of those. And type 2s are strength fibers, which are referred to as fast twitch muscle fibers because they elicit a strong, powerful contraction and response, but they
explosive.
fatigue. Yeah, they fatigue quickly.
Right.
So that's why they're fast.
Or more quickly, depending on the fiber itself.
Yeah. Depending on those sub-classifications of strength as well. Now, endurance fiber, or slow twitch, or type 1, is more of actual red muscle fiber tissue, and that is because of the presence of, because there's more presence of oxygen during that activity, there's more red blood cells in that tissue. Whereas strength fibers are more white, because they're anaerobic muscle fibers that they don't use nearly as much oxygen. Some of them do use some oxygen, but for the most part, there's not nearly as much oxygen present. Am I still right?
Yes.
Okay.
I will say this really quick. I'm not going to break it down because Taylor and I have not discussed this outside of this, so I'm not going to do that because it's hypothesized.
Quit telling people what you're not going to do.
I'm going to not do that.
In this episode, we will not do this. We will not do this. We will not do this.
But you just did it. No, but I'm not going to hypothesize about the fact that there is aerobic and anaerobic is a misdemeanor, and it's not actually true.
Is a misdemeanor?
That's not true. Yeah.
I thought it was a felony.
It's a felony. But you know what I'm
saying. Did you mean a misnomer?
Misnomer. See, my brain's already not working. This is like the second in a row. Well, at least I'm not as frustrated as I was last time. This is really quick. But yes, a misnomer.
So elaborate on that. Why do you say that?
Well,
because they're not exclusively different. Because there's carryover.
The fibers are different in how they work. But when I was reading a researcher, I thought I'd turn that stinking thing off. I'll turn it off in a second. When I was actually going through and studying on a researcher that was talking about how everything uses oxygen. Mm-hmm. And he was going into more detail on it and explaining why lifting weights was actually an aerobic-based exercise.
Well, it's still, when you think about it, it still is because there's still oxygen present in some of these.
I'm not going to deny that, but because of the nature of this, that's why I don't want to go into that hypothesis because it'll make an absolute cloud over this muscle fiber thing that'll make it a lot more difficult. Okay. But yes, based off what you were saying, yes, that is the scientifically researched out muscle fiber concept is what you said.
One thing that we should specify too about muscle fibers is that there is some genetic predisposition, as this is a carryover episode from what we talked about with genetics previously in an episode. But genetic predisposition will also determine a certain balance of fast and slow twitch muscle fibers in different parts of your body, as well as certain muscle groups are going to tend to be either more fast twitch or slow twitch based off of their function. Like, for example, calves and abs tend to be more slow twitch muscle fiber or endurance because you're using them constantly to breathe and to walk. And so they need to have more of that type of fiber present. Otherwise, we would not be able to perform those functions, or at least for a very long period of time.
Right.
And then things like your larger leg muscles and your back that are more like power and chest, like that are more powerful strength fibers because you don't use them as often. And when you do, they're from more of those large movements.
Yes.
Those are going to be predominantly fast twitch muscle fibers.
Right.
And there's going to be variation depending on the person.
That's partly why I think that when we were talking body types last time, that you have an ectomorph or a endomorph or a mesomorph, they're going to have, and like I said, this is my theory, and I want to make that clear again, but I believe that their muscle fiber set is naturally going to lean towards one of the groups of these in a specific way, and I think that's one of the reasons why you'll have a lot more difficulty in gaining muscle, depending on or ease depending on where you are because of muscle fiber basis.
Yeah,
but that's my theory. So
now, as for to continue talking about type 1s or endurance or slow twitch muscle fibers, they're endurance fibers. So there's a high presence of oxygen, so they're more aerobic. So when you engage in traditional aerobic activities or cardio, these are any muscles that you're utilizing to engage in that activity to propel yourself, especially like your legs, when you're doing running or elliptical or whatever. That's primarily the fibers you're recruiting, are fibers that can go for a long period of time, for hours on end. That's kind of the duration of use with these. However, they're not very strong, so their power output is less. But because of their endurance, they can continue to just go for a long period of time.
They don't fatigue as much.
Yeah, and then what's the primary fuel source of endurance fibers is triglycerides.
Yep.
We had mentioned.
So it's fat based.
So that's where a lot of people will say, "Hey, you got to do your cardio because it's more fat burning." And though that energy source happens, that's more of its primary energy source. That's not the only way to burn fat. I think we should clarify.
Well, that's true,
but it can be an effective method.
But see, this is where the tie-in comes in a lot with the different muscle fibers that I was talking about before, is what they'll use as energy and what they produce, as well as consuming is what they're using. But if you notice, like when you start talking type 2As, what's it producing? Lactic acid. Okay,
yeah.
And what is one of the things that happens with type 1s? They consume lactic acid. So as you're working through that, your muscle fibers are setting up a pathway to make it so your body actually can continue to move forward while it's using other sources of energy. I think that's really cool. That's one of the things that always intrigued me about muscle fibers.
One thing to specify, and personally I think we should do this as another episode because I'm still kind of wrapping my head around it, because when you're talking about metabolic energy pathways, there's a lot of complexities to it. But lactic acid is not a waste product, correct, as formerly thought. It is actually another utilized form of energy in the energy system, depending on what activity you're doing. But we can talk about the details of that later. So some people say, lactic acid is a waste byproduct. That's actually not true. It is a byproduct, but it's not waste. It's not like something that your body has to now filter out and expel. Right. It's something that's going to be reutilized for other purposes.
Right, and that's why I'm saying. That's why I think it's important in this one to cover briefly. Is it's it kind of rolls into keeping somebody moving forward. Again, our bodies were made for survival. I mean, let's be real. So when you talk about using something that's for an explosive push to get moving forward faster, like a type 2 fiber, any of the group, it sets up the next roll into the type 1 fiber so that you keep moving forward, and you actually that's why the endurance factor with those is you can continue to run long distances and you don't have to slow down and stop because you don't have to explode forward if you're already moving.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of tight. That's the reason why I thought we should talk about briefly.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too that when you engage in a specific activity and you start engaging in something else, there's this transitionary process. It's switching over to different energy sources. It's not like you're on one particular source, and then all of a sudden you start doing a different activity, and it immediately switches over 100% to that other energy system.
No, the body doesn't do work like that.
Yeah, it's more of this gradual transition.
Well, just think about it when you're moving yourself forward. You have to start from a position of non-movement, and then kinetic energy. You start to move yourself powerfully forward. And it's easier to continue to move it forward, so your fibers wouldn't have to be the same. So the body itself, when it engages, is going to work in a scale because of that. That over a course of time, it's going to move from one fiber that's going to cause you to explode forward to another one that's going to the distance will be able to be met because of those fibers. So it just makes sense that it's going to continue to click over, or you'd have to stop.
Yeah.
So
further details, excuse me, on type 2A, which is our first category of strength muscle fiber or fast twitch or white fiber.
See, and I would actually question that a hair.
Well,
2As.
To not be black and white or red and white about it.
No, agreed. I would almost call them a pink because they still
it's actually going to be a lower presence of red blood cells.
Correct, because they don't need it as much. The way that it works though is it's a longer term. And so it's going to have more oxygenation so that it actually can move forward a little bit more. And that's the reason why it's going to be more. It's not really going to, even though they call it a white fiber, it's going to have more red to it.
Well, and like it says here, it's classified as a fairly high resistant to fatigue type of fiber. So it is semi-slow twitch.
Right.
If you want to talk, hair splitting details.
But we're talking scales again. See, when we were talking about this, you were talking about the idea it's a scale. Your body works in a scale format,
like a gradual.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to jump out of line of how we're going now and jump to type 2B. So type 2B fibers.
Should we really do that?
Yes, because it makes more sense to
I don't want to get them mixed up on the order.
No, and especially Sue, I apologize because I know you're an order person, so I'm killing you. But if you go to type 2Bs and you start from this point, because I think talking about type 1 makes sense to start with, but we have to jump to type 2Bs because it's the one that pushes first. It's the hardest pushing.
That's true.
It's going to hit. You're going to hit with more power. It's when somebody is a sprinter and they're push off the blocks. It's going to be a type 2 fiber that's striking.
I think the point that you made about it being the initial catalyst to generating the kinetic energy,
right?
That makes sense.
Yep.
Because it's what is needed most to begin the propulsion of your body.
Exactly. And so when you push off with that. You only need that kind of power, and so your body, the way the type 2B fibers that were made, or why they were made, is so your body can move forward really fast like that. So at that point, they don't need to be there anymore as far as for making you move forward anymore, so they burn out.
Yep.
Okay, so that's why it's really fast. That's why it's under a minute that these fibers are going, because you don't need to keep this extreme burst going. Now you got to push into something else. That's why the type 2 X fibers come into play. Okay, does that make sense? So then you rotate into something that's going to go a little bit further and give you a push that's still going to be powerful and still going to be strong.
This is
still
pretty much
fast.
based off of depending on the activity that you're doing and the energy that's required, and the duration that you're performing that activity.
Absolutely.
So type 2Bs are the strongest, shortest duration fibers.
Yes.
Then it goes to type 2X, which are more moderate. Then to type 2A, which are fairly high, longer duration, and type 1s, which are the longest duration.
Exactly right.
All right.
And so and that's why you kind of take the idea of how long you're pushing. So if you were going to push, let's say you're lifting weights and you're doing bench press and you're laying down, you're pushing it the weight for over a minute, you're going to be into a different type of type 2 fibers.
Yeah.
Because your type 2Bs are going to burn out in that time period without question. So you're going to swap over to something that's still a high power pushing fiber in the type 2X fibers, but it won't be the same power that you have in the type 2Bs. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's why when you're doing a rep range, that's a and this is why when we talked about this before, it was kind of a big deal in my eyes to know this kind of stuff, is when the type 2Bs are usually bigger. They expand more. They because they have more power. They're the strength muscle, but they are, because they burn out so fast. The type 2X is where your sweet spot is, in my opinion, when you're actually growing from. So when you're
like, are you talking in reference to hypertrophy?
Yes.
Yeah. And hypertrophy is a term that's used it still is a strength type of training, but it's a combination of strength and endurance.
I would argue that a little bit. I would say 8 to 12 reps.
Based off muscle fiber recruitment.
Well, right, but I don't think you're really going to recruit the type 1s. You're still going to be
not type 1s, the type 2As. And
right,
the type
but
2X.
See, they still grow. So your type 2s, all your type 2s are where your real size comes from. Okay, type 1s, it's not that they can't grow, but that's the reason why people have a lot of problems in their calves. And your abs
they're
enormous.
Physically thinner fibers, are they not?
They're physically thinner. They don't expand as they get more used. They don't expand like the type 2s do.
Their performance
changes to endurance. And so when you're doing things with your calves and
that's why people talk about struggling so much with
calf growth.
People who want to grow their calves larger.
Yep. Calves, forearms, abs. Like I said, how many guys do you see that have abs?
Well,
5
dude,
inches
I
thick?
actually just PR'd this last week on deadlifts and ripped 325 off the floor, and actually felt like I could have done it twice. But look at my forearms.
Right.
I mean, you can see some of the musculature, but they look like skinny arms.
Yeah.
Because of my ectomorph body, right? And forearms just are not that big of muscles.
Exactly, and that's why I think you're a type 2B, type 1 combination overall. And again, understand that we're talking a lot of theory in this episode. And a lot of this theory is just because I've played with this a lot over my own life, but so it's anecdotal. But type 1
the classifications of these fibers are all scientifically based.
Yes, and then what we're throwing out there is scientifically based. But like I said, what we're going to kind of delve into through this episode is going to be a little more hypothetical. So, but that's the reason why I think your muscle fibers are type 2B, because you get a lot of power. Mm-hmm. You push, boom, you're putting up more weight. You're getting more power, you're getting more strength, and they build with less reps. Mm-hmm. So because you can't use them for more reps, they start to burn out.
Let's talk about the details of that. So in layman's terms, so people can understand. Okay, when am I recruiting specific fibers and why?
Okay.
So if we talk type 2Bs, these are using these are your strength fibers. So
do you want to talk rep ranges? I mean,
yeah, and I mean we can nitpick about the exact rep ranges, because I know that you and I have somewhat varying philosophies. But
no, they're pretty close.
They are pretty close. I would say your type 2Bs are right around 1 to 4 reps.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
I would agree
so
with that
if you're doing, and when I say rep range,
I would actually say 1 to 3 probably, but yeah, same concept.
Yeah. Understand that the weight has to be appropriate. I could take, for myself, 10-pound dumbbells and curl them 4 times. Is that really going to be recruiting my strength fibers? No, because that's not challenging. Well, for the most part, it's not going to stimulate a lot of growth because it's not challenging enough for me.
It won't stimulate growth. I agree with that.
But they are being used to begin the initial movement of the weight.
That's what I'm saying. It depends on speed. It depends on intensity. Uh-huh. If you could do intense, now granted, you're not going to do this, but if you could do an intense, fast burst with a curl, mm-hmm. you're going to incorporate 2B fiber.
They'll be being utilized, but what I'm getting at is that for the development of these muscle fibers,
agree. Yeah.
The weight selection has to be appropriate for the rep range you're choosing.
And your rep range is going to be something that's going to be heavy.
Yeah, so it's going to be a heavy, challenging, not quite going all the way to failure, but it's got to be it will be a tough way. And even if you're going to failure, it would still be these fibers.
Correct.
But that's what's going to be recruited.
They would burn out, and then you'd start to burn out your central nervous system is the problem. But that's a totally different episode. We'll touch on it really briefly since I brought it up, because I don't want you guys to get overloaded on this. But so now the central nervous system, overloading it with extreme weight, you put pressure on your nervous system as well. And because
not
of
just
that,
your muscle,
right? And because of that, it causes. That's one of the reasons why you have a major overload, that you don't get any real progression, is because your central nervous system starts to shut down from stress. And so because of that's why I wanted to cover it really quick. But that's a side note completely.
So the type 2Bs, low endurance, fast performance, forcible contractions, high strength, recruited in about 1 to 3, 1 to 4 reps. The energy source they're using is primarily creatine phosphate,
and ATP.
And ATP is it's pretty much your pure energy. The energy is the actual breaking of the bond. But when you talk about ATP, you're pretty much talking the actual energy unit.
Correct.
But creatine is utilized to create ATP, just like any other substrate. But so that's kind of your primary energy source right there. Now, I'm curious about your thoughts on type 2X rep ranges.
See, that's the one that, in my opinion, is going to be. And this is where we're going to go completely, in my opinion. I don't want to say this is scientific, but this is my belief. I think type 2X fibers are some of your fastest growing fibers as far as expanding. So if you want to get a different size growth, right, from your muscle and density. Okay, you're hitting type 2X fibers. So you'll be doing somewhere between 4 and 6 to 4 to 8 reps. Okay.
And
if you do it in that rep range with the right kinds of weights, you still...
Does this coincide with like the Mike Matthews approach?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
For muscle growth?
Absolutely. I think if you were to talk to him, because again, this is theoretical in my eyes, because I haven't talked to Mike about this directly, but his belief system, the way he works out, leans towards the type 2X fibers.
And do you believe? I guess you said you hadn't talked to him, but I was going to ask if you think that's the reasoning behind that.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Absolutely, because like I said, I think my personal belief is that is the overall strength fiber line is the type 2X.
Well, and that would make sense for like protocols like 5x5s.
Absolutely, this is another one that causes extreme strength, or starting strength, or any of those lean towards this fiber. Cool. That makes sense. So
this is more of a it's still a strength oriented fiber, and it's very fast. It's not quite as fast in terms of how fast it contracts.
Right,
and forcibly it contracts, like compared to type 2B. It's more of a medium or moderate resistance to fatigue. And it's still anaerobic.
Yep. Technically,
but usually it'll be completely fatigued. You want to skim over time frames?
We can, but I wouldn't worry about it as much. We'll just do it based off of rep ranges because I don't necessarily agree with the.
That's what I was gonna say.
The minutes, because the minutes
is deceptive.
Is deceptive for sure.
So rep range. So yeah, I like what you had said about the 4 to 6 rep range. This is where, if we want to talk about oxidative capacity or the oxygen presence, it's going to start increasing, even though it might be very little.
Right.
Once you start going into more close to type 1s, that's when it starts to increase that potential.
It's also because the oxygen is being pushed into it because of the duration.
Yeah, it's just like you might not be doing full-on cardio, but when you start lifting weights for a specific duration, you'll still feel your heart rate elevate because the demand for oxygen is starting to increase, even though you're not going fully into an aerobic state. Then your energy source for type 2Xs is going to still be pure ATP energy. Creatine phosphate still a little bit potentially.
Glycogen.
Yeah, and as that creatine depletes, which creatine can be depleted in a matter of seconds depending on the activity you're engaging in. So once the creatine's gone, it's going to start transitioning over to glycogen, which is that stored food energy, usually coming from carbohydrate sources. Right. And that's stored in the muscle, bloodstream, and liver. Well, I guess when it's in the bloodstream, it's called glucose, but in the liver and muscles, it's called glycogen.
Yep.
And those are your primary energy sources for type 2X fiber recruitment. Then we go over to type 2As, getting more close to endurance here. These have more of a resistance to fatigue as you get closer to them being endurance. But they're still strength. They're still involved in anaerobic activity.
Well, and this will explain your question. Well, not explain, but this will actually put a little bit of a point onto your question that you just asked
with rep range.
With rep range, because
would you call this 8 to 12?
I would say this is 8 to 12, potentially 15 to 20. Okay, so
really,
yeah. So here's the reason why is because very seldom do you have somebody actually have buildup of lactic acid feeling in their muscles between 4 and 6.
Oh yeah, I almost never feel that.
Right, but you start.
I get fatigued before I even
absolutely
in that rep range before I feel any lactic acid.
Absolutely. So
and you'll feel lactic acid, people, because that's when the muscle starts to burn.
Yes. Yep. So
that's when you know you're switching over these different energy pathways.
Exactly right. So when you start to go into a 8 to 12 or 10 to 15 or 15 to 20. Is where you start to really feel a lactic acid push,
and it's because that the lactic acid is building up a presence in the muscle, and it's taking time before that lactic acid is being reshuttled back into being utilized as an energy source.
Exactly right, because it's starting to swap which muscle fibers they're firing.
And that's why when you go into like an endurance activity, the burning starts to go away because that transition is fully taken place.
Exactly right, because then it starts to consume it.
Like when a perfect example would be like start walking on a treadmill at a slight incline, but one that you can maintain for a long period of time. Your legs will burn, and then all of a sudden you'll get into it for a couple minutes, and then all of a sudden that burning sensation goes away, and your performance increases.
And that's why.
Yeah.
That's the reason why. So that's the reason why, even though this is kind of a more scientific based document that you're looking at when we're talking about this, that's why I don't like their timelines, because it doesn't take 30 stinking minutes to
fatigue a type
2A muscle.
Yeah.
Or 5 minutes to go through a type X fiber. So that's why I don't like that range. I'm not saying it's not true, but
but that's why we convert, instead of duration, we're talking rep range.
Right,
really.
Right. Because when you start talking 8 to 12, you're doing that way under a minute.
Depends on tempo.
Agreed on that. That's without fine toothing it. That's very true.
Because a lot of the time, depending on tempo, 8 to 12s, well, 12, not necessarily 8 to 12, but when you're hitting around 10, 11, 12 reps, it can be 40 to 60 seconds.
Yeah, if you're going slow. I don't like the pause waiting in between. I think that
for time under tension.
Yeah, it causes kind of an issue in this. But if we sidetrack on the fibers and start talking about that, it's going to mess with us too. But so I guess because we're getting kind of the point where we wanted to end on this. So to break down my thought process on this, if you have a lot of type 1 fibers, or if you have a lot of type 2 fibers, not breaking it down to the three, just to do different ones, both are good. It's not, no one should feel like they have bad muscle fibers because they're slow in
they're predominant in one area versus another.
Exactly right. They just lean towards the abilities in one area because they probably have a higher base of fibers. Doesn't mean they're stuck, because they're going to have all these different muscle fibers and they're all going to be active. They just have to be able to know how to use them, and that's why
and recruit them, and develop them.
Right, and so I'm gonna kind of hit on this towards Taylor again on this, and that's the reason why when Taylor and I talk about body typing, when I was talking to him about it, I always recommend a lower rep range for him because I wanted him to hit it
very low rep range.
Right, hit it hard, heavy, strike and quick, because I didn't want his muscle fibers seem to tend towards going to the type 1 fibers. So when he's in doing something for long durations, even if it's 8 to 12, it starts to recruit the type 1 muscle fibers really fairly rapidly. For me, I can probably do in the range of 8 to 12. I start to feel the burn, but I don't go into the muscle fibers of type 1 because my muscle fibers are different in how they react. Mm-hmm. So I can do a higher rep range without having it affect me in a big way. So again, when you're talking, and we're doing this in conjunction to an extent with the last one. So when you take it in consideration with body types, not muscle types, body types. Not that you can't do a higher volume. You can. The problem is when you start to do a higher volume, it's going to incorporate the wrong muscle fibers, and so your body is not going to go in the direction that most people think they're going to.
Or just you hit certain levels of fatigue. Like, I know we're kind of talking the body types a little bit, but when you talk about an ectomorph, they have a higher predisposition hormonally to elevated cortisol levels.
Absolutely true.
So that's why you recommend, for me, I need to get in, hit those type 2B strength fibers quickly and get done with my workout, because I will easily over fatigue my body than an endomorph or a mesomorph.
Absolutely.
And that stress hormone response will limit my potential muscle growth in that strength realm if I spend too much time over fatiguing and overtraining my body.
Right.
Right?
Yes. Okay. And when you start having higher cortisol levels, you start to have higher inflammation. So when you start to go through that process, the inflammation is going to be fighting against you as well. So you're actually going through a lot of different stages in this. And that's, like I said, this is the reason why I think that body typing, though it's not a pure science, is something that helps and is beneficial for someone to look at, because they can incorporate their knowledge base and use it to their advantage to actually be able to put the pegs together to make it so they progress the direction they want to. It's not, like I said, it's not something that is restrictive. It actually gives them a catapult to move forward if they didn't do it like this and they just go into, say, a high volume run, it's gonna physiologically they're gonna have a reaction that's gonna slow their process down if they go into a lot of volume instead of a lot of weight, because of the nature of the way these fibers work. And that's the reason why we want to do this in conjunction with the last one, if that makes sense. But
okay. So, and then I don't think we hit the energy source on type 2A, so we'll hit that real quick, which is still possibly creatine can be recruited, but usually, from what I've learned, it's going to be depleted depending on the activity. And then you've got it's still in the it's still an anaerobic fiber, but it's becoming aerobic, and it's in the glycolytic pathway as well, or anaerobic glycolysis, which means you're pulling glycogen, food energy, from the muscle. Yep. It also produces lactic acid. This is probably where they would feel the most buildup of that.
Exactly right. That's why you can see that in that rep range. That's why when you start talking 8 to 12, 10 to 15, or 15 to 20, you get a lot of buildup like that, because that's where you start to burn.
Mm-hmm. And then that's when it transitions over to endurance type 1 slow twitch muscle fibers, again, which are mostly in the very endurance or aerobic activities. And they have a high fatigue resistance, and so they last a long time. Primary fuel source being triglycerides, or a type of fat, and it consumes lactic acid. So this is where that burning starts to dissipate.
Yep.
And now, you had mentioned type 2A, type 2As being like 15 to 20. So you would say type 1s don't kick over until 20 reps when you're doing a resistance
would be my guess.
Exercise?
Yeah, okay. and again, it's still going to be individual. You're going to have people that actually can have their muscle fibers last longer.
See, for me, I personally feel I kick over into endurance at around 12.
Yeah, and I can believe that.
So
I would believe that. See, me personally, especially if I'm doing calf stuff, I can go to 50.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
See, and I can. Well, but see, then you're talking because the presence of slow twitch muscle fibers would be more predominant in your calves. Because I can still, when I do calves, I'll still do high volume sets.
What I'm saying
20
is,
or 30 reps.
You're
and
right,
they don't burn.
But mine do.
Yours do burn or don't burn?
They burn all the way to 50 and 60.
Oh, okay, so that makes sense because you're saying you're more. But
my calves,
twitch than
yes,
I am.
my calves are naturally larger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes
Without
sense.
question,
Mine are a lot smaller. They're lean and they're cut, but size-wise, they're small.
Right, and that's the reason why, in my opinion, and that's why I'm saying a lot of this can be less scientific. But
no, that's a really interesting observation, though, about like you hitting your level of fatigue at a different period than I am, even though if we're doing the same.
It'll last. It'll last. It won't start to burn through it.
Mm-hmm.
So I won't start to get that, as you put the rhythm, is what I would say in a run. Mm-hmm. I don't get that rhythm to the point where my legs aren't burning still. They still burn.
Mm-hmm.
And yours would work through it. Quicker. You would transition quicker because, like I said, your fibers are different than mine. So because of that, it's going to make it so you're going to have a harder time getting mass to it. Not that you can't, because type 1 fibers expand as well.
I put a 1/4 inch on my calves about a month ago.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you that even if we were to work out more often together, we could probably affect your calves in a big way.
Are you asking me out?
Wow.
Just kidding.
I
figured this was a really informative episode, so I had to throw some comedy in there.
That's fair. And I'm going to have to say no.
Dang.
I do think you're cool, though.
Was there anything, I want to go breeze over them in a chronological order so people can write them down if they want, but was there anything else you wanted to cover before?
No, if you got questions you want to throw at me, that's cool, but if you want to just kind of go through it really fast, so especially for someone like Sue that likes to have this in a tight fashion,
okay,
I'll let you do that.
We're going to go chronologically from strength to endurance. So categorically speaking, it's strength, and they're labeled as type 2 fibers. The first category is type 2B. The second category is type 2X. The third category is type 2A. Then you go to endurance or slow twitch muscle fibers, which is type 1. Again, type 2 fibers are fast twitch. They're predominantly more white than red fiber. And type 1s are slow twitch, and they're predominantly more red than they are white fiber. Type 2Bs, let's see, what do we want to cover here? Usually about 1 to 4 reps. Very heavy. Very forcible contractions. They use creatine and ATP as their energy source. Type 2X, they're still strength fibers, that's not as strong. They use ATP, creatine, and glycogen, and that's about 4 to 6 reps. Type 2A is still strength, but going towards the aerobic. They use creatine and glycogen, and they start producing lactic acid. And that would be more of the 8 to 12. But Shane would say, I would say 8 to 12. Shane would say more 12 to 20. And then the type 1s are endurance. These not very strong, but they last a long time. Mm-hmm. And they use predominantly triglycerides as fuel, and they consume lactic acid. So that's when that starts to curve over. So does that sound pretty accurate?
Yes, and I don't want to give a shout out to anybody specifically on this, but I do want to throw out there that there has been hypothesized type 3 muscle fibers. I think we mentioned at the very beginning. I'm not necessarily sold on them. That doesn't mean they don't exist. So I want to.
It just means we don't have any scientific evidence to prove it.
I don't have enough scientific evidence to believe it. So, but they are somewhat between the type 2A and the type 1 fibers. They still push hard. They still are strength based, but they have endurance as well. They're the people that talk about them talking about them being the best of everything basically. And I like I said, I want to put them out there just because there is
it might be a thing. Well,
it might be a thing in the future.
People thought there was just type 2Bs and type As for a while.
That's true.
And then we found there's type X. So, I mean, it could just be we have to wait for the science to unravel the truth.
Yep, and see, and this is something else I want to say. Like I said, this has been a semi-hypothetical conversation today, but people talk about bro science being fake. They talk about bro science being something that guys just throw out there in the gym, and that they don't have any foundation in scientific evidence, which is somewhat true because it's based on anecdotal stuff and usually with their own bodies.
Yeah.
The thing I want to say about bro science, okay, that I want people out there to understand is bro science is cutting edge, okay? It's not necessarily scientific, but they're taking risks that science hasn't necessarily gone down the pathway, and it doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that it's not proven yet. It can be proven false, or it can be proven true.
I think the issue people have with bro science is not that it's necessarily false, which I think some people do consider that
Absolutely
the case,
they do.
but that not everything is controlled for.
None of
it is anecdotal.
Yes,
so
it's all anecdotal.
They're not studying it on a large scale or even a small scale population.
Right.
So it's harder to determine whether that's going to trend with everyone else.
Which I agree with.
And then what factors are they controlling for, which is very difficult to account for.
Right. The evidence isn't really necessarily backed by it. It is in themselves, but it's not all the way around.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that if somebody's doing something that's bro science based, as long as you're not getting injured doing it, I say go for it. I say take a risk, take a shot. Just don't do something that's not intelligent.
Calculated risks.
Be calculated in how you do things so that you don't make mistakes.
Yeah.
Because bro science is leading edge, and that's why they do these studies.
I think there is some stuff that is just pulled out of thin air,
without question.
that is just that isn't scientific.
Without question.
But there are people that engage. I mean, we do that. We engage in self-experimentation that would be considered bro science because we're not researchers or scientists or conducting it under complete controlled measures.
Right.
But we still are experimenting with it, and it's eliciting different responses
or
outcomes.
That's why I wanted to bring it up briefly.
So it's not that necessarily you can only trust scientific evidence. Because there's some scientific evidence you can't trust because it's not designed well, and I want to do an entire episode on how to interpret scientific research, but that's another beast. But
and we can talk researchers that I really like, and then we can talk researchers that I question. But that's again that's perspective and completely irrelevant in this conversation.
Cool. So there you have it, people. There's your classifications for muscle fiber types, how to recruit them, and their fuel sources, their purposes, and the outcomes. So
hopefully this has been informative and
entertaining.
As Taylor has so wisely placed.
Yep. All right. We will catch you guys next time. See you later. Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Shane and I hope you learned something new and exciting today about your own health and fitness. Head over to metabolicradio.com. There you'll find our bios and our results-driven programs that are designed to help teach you everything you need to know when it comes to getting real permanent results. You can also sign up for our newsletter to get free weekly updates. To chat with Shane or I, just email us at taylor@metabolicradio.com or shane@metabolicradio.com. We would love to hear from you. You can also join the conversation on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com and search for Metabolic Radio Private Forum. There you can request to join the group. We would love to add you to the conversation and answer your questions on the show. And hey, if you like our podcast, please help us grow our community by leaving us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. We would really appreciate your help. Thanks again so much for all your support and your listenership. Now go out there and spread the good word of fitness.